Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the B2B Marketing Asia podcast. I'm Joe Escobedo, and joining me today is Mick Spiers, who is the founder of the Leadership Project. Good to see you again, Mick.
Great to see you as well, Joe. Great pleasure to be here with you and your audience.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things I want to get your thoughts on, because you are the founder of the Leadership Project, we obviously have to talk leadership. And so maybe I'll start off right at the bat. We talk about maybe one specific or maybe a couple different examples of what you define, what we envision as a great leader, and then working backwards, what makes them. So maybe if you have one specific example off the top of your head, maybe we start with that.
Yeah, sure, Joe. And it's not going to be one, but I hope this will make sense. I have a concept that I've built called the amalgam leader. And this is where you take different leaders that you've had in your career and you're looking for those things that really inspired and motivated you, and you're looking to learn from that. Along with that amalgam leader, you'll also think about some of the bad or horrible bosses that you've had and what was it that they did and how did they make you feel so that you can put that in your memory bank as to not to repeat those mistakes. And I'm just going to give some quick examples, Joe. One of my CEOs of my career, CEO of Talis Australia, was Chris Jenkins. And for me, his was relationships and relatability. I'm talking about a guy here who could go and have a beer on the dockyard with shipwright workers, like dockyard workers, in the afternoon and have a wonderful, relatable chat with them, and then go and have dinner with the Prime Minister of Australia that night and still have the same level of connectedness and that level of relationship building. So he's the relationship guy. Matt Cole, who was the CEO of Cubic Transportation Systems when I first joined them, he's the visionary. The ability to paint that vision of the future and to give people purpose and meaning. And then there's another one, Miller Crawford. He was the head of ground transportation systems for Talis worldwide. And he was the storyteller. Absolutely brilliant at telling stories that made you remember the message that he was. Now that's just three. That's not the whole complete picture of the amalgam leader, but I pick these little things of different leaders that I've had over the past, and I build my own version of what makes a great and inspirational leader.
Yeah, I love that for a couple different reasons. One of which is when people think of leaders, they always think of the big names, visionaries, Steve Jobs, and so on. But I like the fact that you have made it more relatable to people in your life that have influenced you and picking up different traits, both good and bad. You mentioned relationship building, visionary, and storytelling, which I think are definitely some key traits. I think I try to do the same as well, too. Once I started my company, I looked at my previous work history and I said, okay, what are some of the bosses that really helped empower me? So shout out to Vanessa, if she's listening, who really gave me the freedom to fail and learn at a very young age. And I think that helped me tremendously throughout my career. And then on the flip side, I've talked about this previously, I've had bosses who maybe did the exact opposite of that. So I was looking at things that, how can I avoid that when I have my own team? So I think that's a great exercise for most folks.
Yeah, and kudos to Vanessa. You've gone on to wonderful things, Joe, and part of that is your upbringing. It's all of those experiences that you've had. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Joe. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and one of the things that you're passionate about as well, too, is helping employees and leaders find their purpose, which I think I hear this all the time, whether you're a senior executive or you're just starting your career, you are trying to figure out what do you want to do. And like I said, senior executives still face that challenge even they're CEOs. So I guess as a leader and an individual, what is your process behind that? How do you get them to find a clear path or purpose in their life or their career? And then maybe how do you get leaders to parlay that same skills to their employees?
Yeah, wonderful question, Joe. And that is what everyone is looking for. Everyone's talking about the great resignation at the moment, but you could call it the great protest, where people are looking for purpose and meaning. They're looking to work for organizations where what they do matters and where they individually and collectively matter. So I do help people on that process, and I use a combination of exercises that I've picked up over the time. My favorite one is Ikigai, and a lot of people have probably heard of that in the audience, but I do a little bit of a twist on it, and I'll explain that. So the Ikigai process, a Venn diagram where you document what is it that you love doing and being very honest about what charges you. And I'm not talking about specific tasks. I'm talking about what was it about that task that really got you excited and motivated? What are you good at? And putting aside being humble for a moment and just own it. Everyone in the world has got their own unique superpower, if you like. They also have their own kryptonite, by the way, and you need self-awareness to be aware of those things. But everyone has their own superpower, so just own it. Don't have to be humble on that one when you're doing an ikigai, and just say, what are you good at? What does the world need? You need to add value to the world. When you're adding value to the world or to other human beings, that is what brings you personally joy and fulfillment, when you know that what you're doing has an impact and it matters once again. And the final one, and here's the one where I do a bit of a twist. Traditional ikigai diagram says, and what can you get paid for? And I convert that into what can you be rewarded for? And rewards aren't just fiscal. It's about what does bring you that joy and fulfillment. What gets you springing out of the bed in the morning? What puts you into a flow state, which for me, it's talking about leadership, losing complete concept of time. Time becomes immaterial because you're in that flow state, and that brings its own reward when you watch other people grow. So I change the word paid for and I make it reward for, to make sure that we're not just thinking about fiscal rewards. So that's the ikigai exercise. The other one I borrow from SPI Media, in fact, so Pat Flynn, and it's called the past jobs exercise. And that's when you look back at every job that you've ever had and write down, what was your most memorable moment, both positive and negative? And what was it about those moments that made you tick? And it's really interesting to see what the trends are that come by. So ikigai and past jobs are two exercises. There's another one, which is a visualization one, which you look forward 5 years from now and what would good look like? And then you do it again and go, what would great look like? And that tells you a lot about yourself as well.
Yeah, I think those are some very practical tips. I think Pat's great. I love his podcast, but I love your little twist when it comes to rewards and not necessarily thinking of money. And I think this is something I didn't learn until later in life. When I was younger, I chased money whenever possible, and so I took jobs that I didn't really like, but they paid me more than, say, job B. So I don't think I really found much joy in that after a while, because I made okay money, but I was burned out. And I think it goes back to what you're talking about, finding your purpose. For me, if I don't have a clear idea in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish for myself personally as well as for the business, I tend to burn out quite quickly, because people know I move very fast. I do a lot going in at one time. But if I don't feel like I'm, in this example, educating people, if I don't feel like I'm, adding value to people's lives, I'm wondering, okay, why am I doing all this? And so that leads to depression and all kinds of other things. So I love that little twist of what's going to reward you, because when you're younger, you think it has to be a monetary reward. And I think that's a misconception for a lot of leaders as well, too. They think if I give someone a raise, then they're automatically going to stick with me. When in reality, we've seen that that doesn't necessarily the case. They get the raise and or they get the bonus and then they're out. Yeah. Because it's just a monetary reward. So yeah, love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly, Joe. And it goes very deep. So part of it is that renewable force of joy that you and I have already spoken about. So you know what yours is, I know what mine is. When you get those moments of joy, that is like a self-sustaining energy force that just keeps you going and keeps you going. The other ones are people are looking for things like, how am I growing here? So where's my opportunity for personal growth? I'm not talking about career progression and promotions. I'm talking about, am I in a job where I'm learning something every day? Am I in my comfort zone, or am I just that little bit out of my comfort zone where great things happen? So people are looking for opportunities just as much as they're looking for purpose and meaning. And of course, let's be clear, you do need a salary. You need to put a roof over your head. You need to put food on the table for the family. But there's much more to life than that. To have a really rich existence, you are having that purpose and meaning. You're learning something new every day for your own personal growth. And that becomes your renewable source for why you turn up every day. And yes, the paycheck pays for the mortgage, puts the roof over the head, and puts the food on the table. But that should be the third one, not the first one.
Yeah, when you talk about learning every day, this is something that I've looked at throughout my entire life. And if I realized when I was ready to leave a job, it's when I thought, okay, I'm not learning anything new. I'm basically just doing the same thing day in, day out. And so once again, that leads to burnout. But I guess the question for leaders is, how do you make sure that your employees are learning something new and they're learning something that they want to learn?
A wonderful question, Joe. And this comes to the heart of a huge mistake that most leaders make at some point in their career, and some continue to repeat it until it catches on. And that is giving them space. Now, there's been a kind of emphasis on leadership for as long as I can remember, where people talk about leading from the front and working harder than everyone else and showing them how it's done, and lead by example. And there are some examples where you should lead by example, of course. But what I'm talking about here is give them that opportunity for growth by giving them space. And I'll give 2 examples of that. And I want all of your listeners to think about the next time that they have this opportunity to put this into action. The first one, learn to be the last person to speak in your meetings. You can set the scene at the start, but then let people explore their own thought process. Encourage them. Give them a psychologically safe environment where they can speak up without fear of judgment and without fear of any kind of criticism or mocking, etc., where they can put their ideas on the table. And that's what fires off new synapses in their brain, and they can go on this discovery. They build extreme ownership in the results of whatever it is that they're working on, but they're learning because they're talking. If you get people talking without giving them the answer, that's what makes sustainable learning in their brains, and they'll remember it forever. If you just give them the answer every time, they're not learning and they're not growing. The next one, I'd say, have a think about the next time you're given the opportunity to, let's say, go and present to senior management, go and present at a conference, whatever the case may be. And before you step in, and you may be very good at presentations, by the way, before you step in and fill the breach yourself, just have a look left, have a look around your team, and identify who in your team would benefit most from having that opportunity to do it themselves instead of you doing it. So the answer, it's actually a simple one. Do less, listen more, and give more space to your team to grow.
I think it's simple, but it's very powerful advice. One thing I want to get your thoughts on more of is around giving people the freedom to speak up. And this may be a cultural thing. My wife is Taiwanese, and she's constantly telling me like how she doesn't feel comfortable in an Asian context speaking up to some of her leadership because, once again, there's that hierarchy there. And I see this as well, too, maybe not a cultural thing, but more of an age thing. When I see, obviously work with students who are very vocal in what their ideas and what they say, and the opposite spectrum, we work with like CEOs who, once again, are also quite vocal in their ideas. Where we see the biggest gap is that middle area. So the middle level managers who are a little bit hesitant about speaking. So maybe even if they're given the freedom, they said, okay, I don't feel confident enough to share my ideas. And I was the same way. So obviously I'm not Asia, but I've been in Asia for 15 years. And even me, I lack the confidence. Even though my boss was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I didn't feel comfortable sharing my ideas in that boardroom context like you were mentioning. I was like very much the behind the scenes guy for many years in my career. So I'm wondering what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question again, Joe. So 2 things come to mind. And the first one is about, it's cultural understanding, but it's the understanding of the individual in reality, because you can have introverts in a Western culture that also still have a preference for doing it a different way. I'll just leave it at that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. So it's meeting people where they're at and understanding deeply what their preferences are. So many people that listen to my podcast or read my material, they'll hear me proudly say that I break the golden rule. And the golden rule is that you should treat other people the way you want to be treated. And I encourage people to ditch that and pick up the platinum rule, which is to treat other people the way they want to be treated. So the first step in what you're talking about is to understand the other person's work preferences. And if they do need a different way to be able to express their opinion in a psychologically safe environment, you need to give them that space and you need to enable that. It's interesting. I will go on the cultural one here for a moment. A project that I ran many years ago was a ticketing system for Auckland, the city of Auckland. And we had people from France, Hong Kong, Australia and New Zealand all on this project. And we would often get into deep debates looking for a technical solution to a problem. And I'll mention him by name. Terry Wong, a guy from Hong Kong, was on this project. Absolute superstar. But he never felt comfortable to speak up unless someone turned to him and said, Terry, any thoughts on this problem? And you'd debate it for 45 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours. And then Terry would speak up and he'd have the answer and everyone would look at each other and go, oh, he's right. And if only we'd invited him in an inclusive and safe way into that conversation earlier, we probably would have had a more productive meeting. So meet people where they're at is the first thing. The second part, and you spoke about middle managers, and I want to talk about that. When I said about being the last one to speak, it's actually deeper than that. You need to be super careful even with things like your body language. People do reflective learning. So the analogy I can give here is about kids when they're first learning to swim, right? So when you go for those first swimming lessons with your baby, your toddler, whatever age you decide to do swimming lessons, when your child is first introduced to the water, they're having these sideways glances at their parents. And they're really asking, is this okay? Am I safe? Should I be having fun? What should I be thinking here? And that's a pivotal moment in their life. If the parent gives any kind of signal that they're worried or panicked or got anxiety, that person or that baby, child, infant can develop a fear of water that can go for a very long time. If the parent is going encouraging and embracing, etc., then they're going to learn to love the water. The same thing happens in the workplace with the leader. Even if the leader is saying nothing, people are taking these little sideways glances, looking for some kind of signal. Is the boss happy right now? And they're testing. And they're looking for that environment. Can I really speak what's on my mind? So it's up to you to listen, to be present, be in the moment, be mindful, and to listen without judgment and without any kind of fear of retribution so that they do feel like they've got the energy that they can keep going. Give them that space. Let them test you. Let them start a little more softly. Give their ideas, but then give them space and give silence and ask inquisitive questions. Tell me more about that, and give them the license that they can openly speak up, and they will have a learned behavior where before you know it, they will be speaking their mind in a very clear way.
Really, really good advice. And I was thinking of a story in my head. This is maybe the antithesis of what you just mentioned, but a couple of years ago, I was running a workshop, and we were in this big boardroom, about 30 or 40 people, and it was like the VP and then all his subordinates were in the room. And so everyone was dead silent the entire time, and I was like, am I that bad as a trainer? This is the first time we had no interaction, because I would ask people, and they would just look around, and they'd look at their boss, and the boss was leaned back with his arms crossed, and they were waiting for his approval, because they felt like they didn't want to speak first. They were waiting for him at the very end to speak. And then after he spoke, then they started speaking up a little bit more. But they could tell that you could feel the tension in the room where he had all the gravitas, or at least in his mind, he had all the perceived gravitas. And as a result, you just didn't get a chance to hear different perspectives. It was just his for the most part. Whether he was right or wrong, I think it's irregardless. It was more in terms of he felt like he had to be the one speaking and the only one speaking. So that was, I think, the exact opposite of what you're saying, but it happens quite a lot, I think, over the years.
That's something to be aware of, though, Joe. And there's a lesson in that as well that I'd like to share with you. I was reflecting on that one just this morning. The timing is unbelievable. When you're in either a position of influence or you're a person of influence and persuasion, you need to be aware that you don't ever turn that off. Once you become a person of influence where people are looking to you for guidance and direction, they are having those sideways glances at you, and you need to be ready. Like the body language you just described, Joe, was a leader sitting back crossed arms, probably frustrated that the team wasn't speaking up, potentially. I don't want to read into what that leader was thinking, but that's a possibility. He needs to be aware of that. And if he wants to break that, he can step forward and go, team, come on. It's time to speak your mind. So he could have broken that, but it sounds like it needed a proactive breaking rather than just allowing it to be silent.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I did need someone to step in. And obviously, I was not his superior on the side, but I couldn't really do it too much. I was more in terms of the education side. But that always begs the question, how do people like that even get into leadership? And I think that's a whole different conversation we could have, that everyone who has had terrible bosses, they always ask the question, how did this person even get to where they are when maybe they have such poor interpersonal or leadership skills that maybe they just managed to have the right relationships internally. And I think everyone listening could probably relate to one or two people who in their career who they're wondering, how do they get to that position?
Yeah.
That's something that we'll get to talk about for a much longer time.
Yeah, we could go on for hours on that one, Joe. I'll just leave one and say that there are many people, and the stats tell us this too, there's many people that have landed in leadership positions where leadership was not for them or no one showed them the way. To give them a little bit of slack, the level of education out there in leadership, particularly for first-time leaders, is quite lacking. And then what happens is they start to learn from those around them. So imagine the leader that you're just talking about who potentially has got some shortcomings in their leadership skills. What's going to happen with the next generation within his team? They're going to grow up to think, oh, that's what the boss does. Once again, it's a learned behavior. So without some kind of proactive steps to intervene and say, no, that's not what a leader does, and this is what a leader should be doing and what leadership is all about, then it just becomes a repeated pattern. And this is how we end up with things like ATD tell us that only 16% of people in the world truly love their job and like their boss, and leadership is at the root of most of those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It always boils down to who are you working with, and going back to what you're saying, like how much reward do you feel like you're getting and learning out of it.
Yeah.
Great advice. One last tip or one last takeaway you would give to every leader or aspiring leader. What's something that they should be doing in order to be successful over the longer term? Maybe just one thing.
Yeah, I'll just go with one then. I could talk forever on that, Joe, but I'll go with values. Lead with your values. Take the time to understand what is important to you. What are your values and beliefs? And don't be shy about telling people about them. When you tell people about your purpose, your meaning, your values and beliefs, a funny thing happens where you start attracting people around you that believe in that same purpose and have a common set of values and beliefs to you. The most important next step is to live by those values and beliefs. So you say one thing and you do that thing. If you say your values and beliefs because you heard on a podcast, that's what you should do, but then your behavior is not congruent with that, that's what erodes trust very quickly. So get out there, talk to people about your values and beliefs, and then live by it.
Spot on. I'm always a big believer of practicing what you preach, doesn't matter what kind of role you're in. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming to the show and sharing all your advice and insights on leadership. It's been super helpful for me, and I'm guessing for the listeners as well, too. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. It was a great pleasure. Anytime for you, sir.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much. Feel free to follow Mick on LinkedIn and all the relevant social channels if you want to find out more about leadership. And as always, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate the support, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.